Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Just working on Buckwild here on this Sunday. I got my parts truck all pulled apart and got all the running gear pulled out of it so I can continue the 8-lug swap and front diff rear axle swap on my race truck. I have all the parts laying here on the shop floor side by side so we can do a comparison for anyone else that is wondering about compatibility or differences between the 1500 suspension setups and the 2500 3500 suspension setups. I've been doing a lot of research on it over the past couple years on and off, and I really couldn't find any side-by-side comparisons that were, here it is, this is what it is. So I figured what better way to find out than do it myself. Full disclosure, my truck I'm working on is a 1994 and my parts truck was a 1997. So there is a difference there in the lower control arms. The difference is bolt-in ball joints on the older trucks and press-in ball joints and cast control arms, lower control arms, on the newer trucks. But other than that, I'm going to show you the differences right here, right now on the shop floor. Alright, so I got everything kind of laid out here. Got the diffs, CV axles, shocks, upper control arms, and the passenger side differential mounts. So if you come here, it's pretty obvious on the control arms that the 2500s are quite a bit wider, about 2 inches wider. But that is the only difference. If you look at them this way, from eyelet mount to ball joint, they are the same. And every other dimension except width is the same. The ball joint mounting holes are a little bit different, so that is stopping a guy from just putting the bigger 2500 ball joint in his 1500 arm, because they will not fit. These do have a little bit different of an angle for the upper mounts, for the upper balls, but I think should be alright. So what I did on my truck was I just cut the mounts off. This side I just kind of have mocked up together. The lower ball joints are the same. I don't know if it's a cast arm difference or a 1500, 2500 difference quite yet. I'm going to go measure my old frame. But I know these cast arms are a couple inches wider than the stamped steel arms. And like I said, I don't know if that's a 1500, 2500 difference or a cast arm, stamped arm difference. I will fill you guys in on that later. But I carefully cut the mounts off of the 2500 frame for the front. The rear mounts, right here, are the same position on 1500, 2500s. You only have to move the front mount. So I cut the mounts off very carefully, scarfed the welds out so I could reuse the mount, because you're not going to be able to save the 1500 mounts unless you cut your shock towers off, which even then, you're not going to be able to save that or the other one. So I very carefully took off the 2500 mounts and kind of butchered off the 1500 control arm mounts, and they were all the way butted up against this shock tower. So that's how far I had to move it. And if you look in here, you can kind of see the old weld where the old mount used to be. So that's how far I had to move it. And I just put the control arms up in there, used the control arm itself as a jig, and welded the new mounts on. And now the 2500 control arm is on there with the bigger ball joint and everything. And like I said, lower ball joint's the same. And this side has the 8-lug knuckle on it. So that's the easy part so far. Going back to the parts, let's look at CV axles. Length, flange to tip is the same. This 2500 one, which is closest to me, the girth on them is quite a bit bigger. The shaft where they go into the hub, they're actually the same spline size and everything. I tested it. The 2500 CV axle will spline into the 1500 wheel bearing. But where they bolt up to the differential, if you climb over here, on the right there is the 2500, and on the left is the 1500. The bolt pattern's a little bit bigger, and the mounting flange itself is quite a bit bigger on the 2500 for the 9 1/4 front diff compared to the 8 1/2 on the half ton. So those will not interchange back or forth. The shocks, the one on the left is my factory 94 shock off the 1500, and on the right is the factory shock off my 97 2500, and they are identical. Height, width, mounting points, everything, shocks are the same. These are your passenger side differential mounts, and the way they bolt up is the same. I have B marked for bottom, just so I remembered which way it went back in. The bottom one is the 1500, top one's 2500. Like I said, they'll bolt in place of each other. The difference is these inside mounting holes. On this 2500, they're spread out just a hair more. Like half a hole width is all the difference. So if you're doing the front diff swap, you have to grab this part or remount your holes, but then you're gonna have a big hokey hole in it, and it's not gonna be right. But like I said, they'll bolt in on the frame exactly the same. The only difference is where they bolt to the diff on the bottom here. The 1500 spread is just a hair smaller, maybe 3/4 of an inch or so. Then we go over to the front diffs here. And I don't think I really have to explain which one's which. The one closest to me is the 8 1/2, and that's the 9 1/4. So the 9 1/4 is a hair wider physically, flange to flange. Just a hair, maybe a flange width. The U-joint, the yokes, that's the word I was looking for. The yokes are the same, so your driveline will bolt right up to the 9 1/4 front diff off of your 8 1/2. Like I said, the year range is different. That's a 97 diff, and this is a 94 diff, so they have the different actuator, which I didn't use my actuator on my old diff anyways, because it went out at the track one day in the staging lanes. So I did the old stuff a socket in it and put the actuator back in, so it's constantly locked in. And on this, I'm going to get the Hummer shaft, which is a one-piece shaft and gets rid of the collar, because this truck is pretty well worthless in two-wheel drive. And if it is in two-wheel drive to drive around the pits or whatnot, then I'm not worried about the front drive line spinning. Like I said, your mounting flange is over here and here on the passenger side. The spread is just a hair wider. And then you come over here, and from the measuring I've done so far, your bottom mount is going to be the same. The top mount you can see on the 9 1/4 is quite a bit taller. So I think that's where I'm going to have to do some fabbing, is change that upper mount. When it comes time to jack that thing up in the frame, get the passenger side on as a jig kind of, I'll see which one, if either of them will bolt up, and then I will show you what we'll have to do to change the top mount on those. The hubs dimensionally are the same. Like I said, on this upper, the ball joints are bigger on the 2500s. So you do have to swap your upper control arms to swap hubs. Other than that, that's all the differences I have found so far between 1500 parts and 2500 parts. I will try and do a little bit more research, maybe parts hunting, and find a year range closer to my 94, and make sure that consistently through the years the parts were the same between 2500s as far as upper control arms and things of that nature. I don't think the knuckles themselves are different because, like I said, this is a 97, so they had ABS sensors. I would like to find some older ones just to make sure that the wheel bearing is the difference on the knuckles and not the knuckle itself. The other things I was kind of explaining I was going to do to the frame is I cut the bump stops off. Those used to be right here. This big old glob of metal. I yarded those because, like I said in my previous video, I plan on going to coilovers probably next winter. So I knew I wanted to get that out of the way. I also cut off the sway bar bracket that used to come down here and come flat right here where your debushings for your sway bar would bolt. I haven't had a sway bar on this truck all season last year, and you couldn't tell a difference, so I cut those off for more room and more weight savings. I don't know if I'd recommend it on a daily driver, but the occasional ice cream cruise in this thing won't miss the sway bar a bit. Working on cleaning up the frame a little bit. She deserves it. Like I said, I have this mount on this side already done as well. I need to finish cutting off the sway bar bracket, or the bump stop. I apologize. Finish cutting off the bump stop bracket on this side. I just cut it with the Sawzall, and I'm going to get in there and trim all this up to the frame, get it all clean, and grind it all smooth like I did the other side. A couple little differences I did notice, because I do have it pulled out here. This is the cast control arm, lower off my 97. I did notice on these, the lower shock mount is bolted on. On the cast arm, it is welded on. Dimensionally, they're the same. But also on these lowers, the rear mount is the same, and this front mount comes to about here. It's, like I said, a few inches wider. I need to go measure my other frame to see if that's a frame difference or a control arm difference. Kind of get a wide angle of it. It's going to be pretty sweet with some Hoosiers on those 8-lug hubs now. It's going to make brakes a little bit more of a pain because these are the old style inboard brake rotors, like a second gen. So you gotta pull the wheel bearing off and pound your studs through and yada 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 to do brakes. But like I said, it's not a daily driver, so you don't have to do brakes that often. Probably going to upgrade to drilled and slotted, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So as far as the swap goes, if the juice is worth the squeeze, that's, I guess, up to the end user. In my honest opinion, in all reality, if you can fix the 2500 that you're looking to rob parts off of, then I would do that. It just saves you a lot of work, and it's just simpler. I'm swapping everything because of the sentimental value of the truck, and an extended cab short bed 8-lug truck is kind of hard to find, especially with the full float 14-bolt rear axle. So if you do find one of those, you really don't want to part it out to do a frame swap. Plus, it gave me a good chance to do my own in-person research so I could make this video for you guys. So you would have the info yourself to see if you want to do the swap. Or if you need to go to a pick and pull and find parts for your truck, you know which ones will work and which ones won't. I will update you guys further once I get the differential either jigged up or mounted itself, and I'll show you what I had to do or what I'm going to have to do to get the diff mounts lined up and get that 9 1/4 front diff in. Then next will be the rear, bolting in the full float 14-bolt rear axle, and that I believe will be a bolt-in swap. Just unbolt my U-bolts, rolled the little 10.5, well, roll my little 9.5 14-bolt out, and roll the new Bad Mama Jamma full float 14-bolt right in the rear of this truck. Thanks guys, and like and subscribe, share with your friends, your GMT400 buddies, so we can get this knowledge out there, and I will update you guys on part 3.